Today we are going to be continuing to talk about testing. We have with us Kenny Naylor, Tanya Hardington. You're going to have to help me if I pronounce these wrong. Is it Itana? Tana Hardington, Fenton Rude, and Jennifer Boyle. Members, the format today, and I do have a text message from Representative Roberts. He is on his way. Representative Fettgatter will not be joining us today. He had something in his district. Members, the format today is going to be kind of a question and answer format, as I understand it. If any of the presenters have statements they'd like to make to the committee, we absolutely would allow that, if you'll let me know. And when we are done with the question and answer format, we will be having a group discussion on laboratory testing priorities, very similar to what we did last week. And members, one second. And so members, we will, well actually first I'd like to start any announcements from the co-chair. Well members, we will begin. You have been emailed a working draft version of packaging and labeling and of testing proposals based upon what we did last week. We will, for the public, we will be putting that on the website. I'm putting staff on notice by the end of this meeting. You guys let me know which website we're putting it on, and we will announce that at the end so we can have that ability for the public to see the same drafts that we're working on. The goals of this meeting are to get us to a point where we could take a vote on the testing standards next week. So we would like to be able to really get in depth. So questions that you have on these, I really encourage you. There are no stupid questions, especially when you're live streamed and people are watching. So if you would move forward, but anything you have, let's ask it now while we have them in here. So at this time, I would like the presenters we have here today to answer questions. I would like to recognize each of you, give a brief introduction of who you are, any statement you want to give the committee, anything you want to tell the committee, and what your expertise is. So the committee members and those listening online will have the ability to know who's speaking and who's talking. When you talk to the microphone each time, and I know this feels weird, but do the best you can to remember to say your name. Because if you don't, I will get text messages from people listening. And so that way, when we're recording this for the live stream, they will let us know. So I believe Ms. Hardington, you're on the left. If you would begin and introduce yourself to the committee, tell us anything you'd like to say.
I'm Tana Hardington. I'm the lab director for the Department of Agriculture. I've been there for 12 years. I started there as a chemist in the pesticide section. I moved on to the general chemistry section as a chemist, and then from there I moved on to the inorganic section, which tests water samples. I was able to be a supervisor in that in that laboratory after a little while, and then I went into the QA position. And so I've seen the whole thing. I've been at every level. And so I feel like I've got a pretty good knowledge of what goes on in there.
And just go ahead and go down the row.
Hi, I'm Kenny Naylor, and I am Food Safety and Consumer Protection Services Division Director. As a part of that, I also have industrial hemp underneath me, so I've been working with that program since April.
And my name is Fenton Rude. I'm the Assistant Division Director for the Land Protection Division of the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality. I've also served on the Marijuana Food Safety Board. And I've, in addition to my professional experience in state government, I've also had experience operating food businesses. I want to point out that the DEQ routinely collects and analyzes environmental data looking at how different environmental exposures can affect people. And then we design management strategies to prevent those exposures. So I say that because one of our assets is that we have a multitude of scientific disciplines within the agency. There may be many questions today that I won't be able to answer, but I know who can, and I'd be glad to get that information back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Rude, will Ms. Boyle not be with us today?
She's here.
Oh,
No, I'm a water quality attorney, and so I really have nothing to offer on lab testing, so I'm sorry, I thought that had been cleared up earlier, but I am here to take notes and pass information.
sounds good. So with that, thank you for those introductions. With that, I'd like to open it up for questions with the experts on the proposals on testing. Co-chair is recognized for a question.
I'll be happy to kick it off and just start with kind of that 30,000 foot. Last week in our meeting, one of the things we got stuck on, wanting to make sure we get this right, and it ends up in heavy metals testing, but the question kind of where I want to start is we had a little bit of debate, and unfortunately I was the person trying to answer questions last week, and I did not know the answer to this at all, but can one or all three of you talk us through how heavy metals get into these plants, and then we'll go into which heavy metals do we worry about in Oklahoma? Why do we worry about those and not others? Kind of that, again, the 30,000 foot, and then we may get much more specific after that. But if you can help with that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Well, I guess I will take the first shot at answering that. This is Kenny Naylor, and I will try to remember to do that. Heavy metals, I just kind of, first all, cannabis sativa, marijuana in this case, is kind of a plant accumulator. It'll pick up some of these metals out of, whatever medium or whatever it's growing in. So having said that, you have several streams that can be in. If they're growing it in the soil, then obviously you can have items that are in the soil either naturally occurring, or in some cases, the history of that soil, if it'd been something old in the site that may have been using, lead, arsenic, or any of the other heavy metals. In addition to that, you've got the water that comes into the facility. If they're growing hydroponically as an example, or even for watering the plant, I like to use the city of Norman as an example because they have naturally elevated arsenic levels. So, there's another input coming in. You also have soilless media, which could be, potting soil, could be like glass, those kind of things that they grow materials in, and all those have the potential of bringing things in because they're usually a composted material that has several waste streams coming in. So in addition to that, fertilizer is another possibility. We do at the department look at some of those for heavy metal contaminants, but once again, that's another possibility or avenue for coming in. So those are the kind of the main inputs that come to my mind, but any input going into growing this crop could potentially add to the levels of heavy metal.
For follow-up?
And thank you for that. So fertilizer, just to make sure, because that was the question that fertilizer could introduce, depending on type of fertilizer, it could introduce a heavy metal into this plant that we don't want. That's
correct.
Okay. Again, going to that kind of 30,000 foot. So we've looked at the state of California, who tests for a whole lot of different heavy metals. And when we ask the question of why their list is so long, and we're looking at a list of possibly just 4, the answer is, in the history of California, through the mining industry, they have, I guess polluted the soil would be the way to say that, in a way that you've got a whole lot of things in California that you ought to be scared of. I've been told, and this is the biggest question that I had coming in today, for Oklahoma, that is relatively true, but it's much more regionally true, that depending on what area of the state you're going to be growing this in, or whatever area of the state the soil that you're going to be using comes from could determine testing. Is that true? And can you kind of help me understand what that looks like a little bit more?
Well, at least on some of these, you're absolutely right. Regionally speaking, some of these are going to be higher in the regional area, you know, and Fenton may know this better than I do, but like in Northeast Oklahoma where you had the old zinc mining and some of that stuff around, I would expect like the cadmium levels in that part of the world to be higher. The arsenic in the water down in Norman is a naturally occurring thing, so, you know, that's a different area of the state with a different area. Some of it will be statewide because if they grow these in the old buildings where maybe you have some lead pipes or some other things that are still in the infrastructure, you may get some from those. And, you know, once again, you know, like I said, we do watch fertilizers to make sure that they don't exceed, but you always have that possibility that something might come through another stream such as that and add to what is being uptaken by the plant. So, did I get all your question there, or?
Sure, for now.
Senator Daniels, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is there a standard measure of what is dangerous to health, harmful to health, and not with each one of these? And let's take Northeast Oklahoma where we had zinc smelters and Barnesville and cadmium. So you would base your testing standard on the place in Oklahoma where the concentration would be higher, or do you actually have testing standards divided up by how you ingest the product? Like certain heavy metal would enter your system if you were eating it, but not so much if you were vaping them. And how many different categories and divisions of testing for these metals do we need to have before the cost benefit is skewed, let's say?
This is Kenny Naylor, and I just want to speak on the fertilizer side, and when we're looking at heavy metals in it, that number is based on what the intake of like humans or animals of the crop would be. So I would think, or at least, you know, my initial thoughts on standards, you would want something that was similar to that was based on the effect to a person or an animal's daily intake of marijuana in this case.
For follow-up?
Thank you. So having not read all the testing standards in the different states with medical marijuana programs, perhaps one of you have taken a look at those. Is there an easy way to do this without reinventing the wheel, given that our heavy metals may be slightly different? Or are we really in a posture of creating something entirely new?
This is Fenton Rude from the Department of Environmental Quality. First of all, in response to your previous question, the testing protocols are going to be the same. What we're really talking about is threshold levels of exposure that adversely affect human health. And just like in the fertilizer analysis that the Department of Agriculture does, all of our work revolves around risk analysis for human health. Now, in terms of the exact numbers, in the Food Safety Board, we were strongly advised by the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics to follow the examples from Colorado, and so that's exactly what we did.
Do you have a follow-up?
Okay.
Yeah, so Chair has a question at this time. So, Mr. Root, on the Food Safety Board, just to drill down into some specifics. In the Food Safety Board, I think you, and help me if I remember this correctly, you recommended testing for 4 heavy metals, is that right? Or was
Yes.
there more?
Yes.
Would it be your opinion that those are the same 4 heavy metals we need to test for in and non-food products, or are there additional heavy metals we should test for?
So this is Fenton Rood. In our environmental cleanup work across the state, the 4 metals that have been previously discussed are the principal metals that we worry about. So I think we're safe in concentrating on those 4.
Is there any disagreement among that?
I don't disagree with him. Most of the other ones we test for in fertilizer are animal related.
I have a follow-up. So for follow-up, Mr. Rood, you also had levels that were inside the Food Safety Board, or the food safety standards. If I misspeak on some of these, I think we know what I'm talking about. At least you know what I'm talking about. The food safety standards. Would those levels be the appropriate levels to test for when we're talking about non-food products and medical marijuana, in your opinion?
So this is Fenton Rood. Again, we followed the example of Colorado, and I haven't specifically studied Colorado standards for non-food products, but I would assume that they would be the same.
Any disagreement in that answer? Senator Daniels, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to turn the tables a little bit, in your reading of these draft proposals that we might make to the Department of Health, does anything jump out at you as being excessive, or do you see any holes that need to be addressed? Any, please. Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
So this is Fenton Rood. Nothing that I have read so far in terms of the work that we're doing in Oklahoma, I would not classify as excessive. And in fact, I think one of the reasons that the Bureau of Narcotics felt like Colorado was such a good example is they have been through a fair amount of controversy and upheaval. They originally adopted very stringent standards, and they have recently relaxed those standards. And the relaxed numbers are the ones that we adopted or recommended.
Co-chair has a question. You're recognized.
And I think that you've answered this question twice, but I'm going to, again, try to ask it as plainly as I can. If I'm going to smoke marijuana or if I'm going to eat marijuana, the levels, the acceptable levels of all of these materials that we're testing for don't change. I mean, I guess my question, and again, I'm far from a chemist, don't even play one on TV. To me, if you're smoking something that is more dangerous, I mean, it's more of a direct, I don't know, hit to your body, however you want to say that. And so in my mind, there would need to be different standards if you're smoking something or if you're eating something. But you're saying one standard across the board works if you're smoking it, eating it, whatever, ain't it? Is that true?
So this is Fenton Rood. My expertise is to use these data to develop human management systems to prevent exposure. I am certain that the scientists who study the human body would argue that different routes of exposure have different impacts. In our work so far, I've not looked at standards for smoking or vaping. But again, based on our Bureau of Narcotics, I would look to the standards that Colorado has adopted for those products.
Chair has a question, unless you have a follow-up.
No, I've got a whole nother line to go.
All right. Well, then the last one, and then I'll go with that one. It has been asked, and this is really for the Department of Ag, Leader Copeland has brought up several times the possibility of the Department of Ag doing testing. So I'm asking you, because I have you here, is that a good idea? Do you have that capability? What are your thoughts on that suggestion?
This is Tana Hardington. I feel like we are probably pretty well capable to take that on. We're pretty close to having the personnel that we need. We have the skill level that is necessary to do the full level of testing that's being required here. We would probably need to have an initial investment as far as probably needing more people, probably needing a couple more pieces of, analytical instrumentation. But as far as having trained personnel and that sort of thing and the ability to take it on, I don't see any, problem with taking that.
For a follow-up? Oh, wait, I guess I'm the chair. I have a follow-up. So to that, and I think you hit one of the questions that I've had about needing additional equipment. When we did Katie and Cayman's Law 4 years ago, the Department of Ag told me they didn't have the necessary equipment to do proper testing for THC levels on CBD-based products. So have they received new equipment since that time? Or are you saying that's some of the new equipment you would need in order to do any of this testing?
Again, this is Tana Hardington. The answer would be both. We do have some new instrumentation that would be able to accommodate some of that. We would definitely need to have an addition to that, though.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond?
Please, yes.
This is Fenton Rude. There are several laboratories within state government, and whichever laboratory you would pick, if you ask us to take on this job, it would require additional investment in every one of the laboratories. More importantly, it takes a great deal of time to bring these instruments online. We have to go through procurement. We have to install the equipment. We have to work with the Office of Management and Enterprise Services because every piece of equipment is run by computers, and they don't have a strong reputation for either customer service or cost effectiveness. So it would not be a rapid solution if we chose to go down that road.
I would happily park on issues with OMES, but that would take a lot longer than we have today. But I think that answers my questions. Mr. Co-Chair, do you have a line?
Can I?
Or,
Can I?
yes, for follow-up.
This is Kenny Naylor. I just wanted to add a little bit to that. One is that Tana is right that we do have, even in some cases, new equipment for this particular item, but all that equipment is currently used for something else. I don't know, how much added testing this would add, but if it exceeds the level that one piece of equipment can do for both cases, then even though that's new equipment, we still might need additional equipment for that.
Thank you.
Just
Senator Yak, you are recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to think how I want to phrase this question, but and I'll try to do it the best I can. So when it comes to the levels of these metals that we're concerned about, so is that tied to, as far as Colorado's rigs, is that tied to dosages, or are those adverse effects, are they cumulative over time? I guess my point is, how do we know what's acceptable if we don't also know what the dosages are?
So this is Fenton Rude. I do not recall whether the Colorado standards are related to dose. Now, exposure to a substance like lead is cumulative, and the science on the human health impact has changed to the point that over the course of my career, I've seen the standards for lead exposure change several times. So the science is evolving on all this. I wish I had a better answer for you.
For a follow-up?
So I guess you did answer one of my questions. You said, as far as you know, on Colorado's regulations, there are no references to dosages when it comes to these things, but you also made the point that some of these effects on some of these materials are cumulative. Okay, that was just clarification. Thank you.
No. Mr. Co-Chair, you're recognized for a question.
So through what both of you have said, there's no lab in the state of Oklahoma that could just pick this up and run with it really quickly. And you guys may be the wrong people to ask this question, but you're the one sitting here, so you can just tell me that you don't know the answer is okay. If there's no commercial lab that is prepared to do this, if there's no state lab that is prepared to do this, but we all know that, I mean, sitting here today, marijuana is legal. It's being grown where it will hit the market soon. Can you talk about your opinion of the negative health effects or what might happen if we do not at all test this product for a period of time?
This is Fenton Rood. To the first part of your question, we have a number of private laboratories in Oklahoma. We routinely deal with private laboratories that analyze environmental samples. It's my understanding that most of those laboratories want to go into this aspect of the business. It is also my understanding that there are some laboratories in existence already in Oklahoma that have all the proper certification. So I believe that the private sector will be able to rise to that market demand.
To follow up, just to, so is your understanding in the labs that you work with that are worried that no one is going to be able to do this when the first harvest happens is false, that you believe that there are labs that are completely prepared to take this on starting today if we ask them to?
That is my understanding, and if it would be useful, I'd be glad to confirm that.
And then to follow up to, and that makes this question a little silly, but just to make it very, very clear, because there's been quite a bit of debate of whether we should do government testing or private testing through the OMES process, the procurement process, bringing on, new employees, and the process that you have to go through, nothing moves fast. Your testimony would be that it will be significantly faster for us to go the private route than the government laboratory route at this point. Is that true?
This is Fenton Rood. That would be my prediction. Just as an example of the complexity, if you were to direct DEQ to take on this responsibility, we would have to make modifications in our building to handle the security for the material.
Senator Daniels, you're recognized for a question.
So let me beat a dead horse. One more question on this. So given that these private labs are interested and you say that some are already equipped to do these things, is the language that we're considering here something that would capture these commercial labs that are already in existence? Is there language here that would literally toss them out that we need to adjust? Does that make sense?
This is Fenton Rood. The language that I'm looking at here does not discriminate between public or private laboratories. It simply talks about the elements that we will test for and what the protocols are. There is an aspect of laboratory management called accreditation. For example, the Department of Environmental Quality serves as the accrediting body for environmental laboratories in Oklahoma. There are also private accrediting bodies. So I think all of that demand could be covered.
I have a question actually for Ms. Boyle. If you wouldn't mind, grab any microphone. You weren't going to get off that easy. And you didn't have a follow-up, Senator Daniels, did you? No, sir. Oh, I didn't think so. Yeah. So Ms. Boyle, while we're going down this road of where we're going to do the testing, there was some talk last week about some delay in the testing requirements, setting up testing requirements, but not requiring a batch be tested for some period of months. I guess my question is more of an administrative rules question. Can an agency create an administrative rule that doesn't go into effect till a later date? Meaning they can an agency put an effective date on an administrative rule?
I believe so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I believe so. Through the normal rulemaking process, we can have an effective date. Normally, they take effect September 1st,
Okay.
15th, I believe, when they're done the normal rulemaking process. But yeah, I don't see any reason why not.
Okay. And you're helping us kind of deal with the debate we're having internally with staff. So even normally when rules are in the rulemaking process, they're not effective immediately. They're effective at some future date.
Correct.
And then final, and then I'll close this loop because I think I'm right on this issue. To close this loop, there is no law that you know of that says a agency couldn't pick an effective date other than September 1st.
That's correct, unless there are fees associated with it. That's the only thing I know, that it has to be approved while the legislature's in session, correct? But that's the only limitation I can think of off the top of my head.
Thank you so much. That's the only question I had there. Senator Paxton, you are recognized.
Mr. Chairman, this might be directed at you. Last week we did talk about moving this date back. Can you remind me as to what the reason was why we wanted to do that?
Yeah, so thank you, Senator. No, that's a fair question and kind of gets into what we were going to talk about. The fear was any type of delay process, and that's something we just have to decide as a committee what we think we should recommend. And I want to be clear, we're making recommendations to the Department of Health. They can do whatever they want, but we're making recommendations. And I'll tell you why I would like to move the date back. While I did hear some testimony from Mr. Rood, which I appreciate, that there are labs up and running, ready to go, without knowing who those are and whether or not they really are ready and whether or not they can fully comply. I think the goal was to make sure we didn't delay implementation of 788 by putting in testing standards, so for it to work as an effective delay.
Follow up?
Yeah.
And I guess this would go to one of you all. Along the same line, with this information that there's possibly private labs that could handle this immediately, in your opinion, what would the delay of, say, 6 months, I think the date I've seen is May 15th, what kind of a potential risk would that be to the public, the consuming public, if this was delayed? Is there a huge risk, or is it minor, or is it something that we should, when we're trying to decide what our recommendation would be, where should that fall in at?
This is Fenton Rood. My response is that we don't know. There has been a fair quantity of cannabis material that has been consumed illicitly for quite some time with no testing whatsoever. We have no way of understanding what that health impact has been. So I don't know that we have a good answer for you.
For a follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my thought process goes, if I grow something in my garden, or if I get something from somebody who grew it in a garden, I don't expect there to be a level of testing because I assume that risk as a consumer. But when I buy something in a store, I assume there's a safety process that somewhat ensures safety of that product. Same thing I think would go with the medical marijuana industry would be that when you go to a store to buy it, that there is a level of expectation that you're buying a safe product. So that's kind of where I'm coming at with this line of questioning. And I agree with the chairman. We want to do nothing that would delay implementation. And we're going to take great lengths to make sure that does not happen and we continue to move forward with this. With your testimony today about the private labs that would be able to handle this, it's kind of changing my opinion on the implementation date of our recommendations on there. So I guess it's not really a question, more of a statement, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. Am I wrong in my thinking of that with the expectations of safety?
This is Fenton Rood. If the concern is documenting the capacity of the private laboratory industry, I would be glad to do some research and share that with the committee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Rood.
Should I provide that to David?
Yes, if you could, that would be excellent.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Senator Daniel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this particular topic, or?
Well, any questions
Anything.
for the committee at all, or for the
Okay.
group at all?
So
the panel?
this is sort of random. But somewhere in here, it talks about labeling, including the name of the doctor and a doctor's recommendation. I think it used the word recommendation. And because the physician plays a sort of cursory role in approving an application for a license, I questioned whether or not the doctor ought to be listed on a label. I just wondered where that was coming from, and somebody could tell me why I'm wrong in thinking that that shouldn't be a part of it, or why is it necessary?
I don't know where that recommendation came from. I actually agree with you. I don't think it should be on there.
Well, in asking the question, I should be able to point you to the exact page and line, so bear with me. Talk amongst yourselves, and I'll get back to you in just a minute when I find that.
And I think we're about to have a labeling discussion, Senator. Do we have any further questions, or do you have a response to this, Mr. Rood?
This is Fenton Rood, and just to put the document in context, it's my understanding that except for the shaded words, the language was a draft produced by the Health Department. So that was, in terms of the doctor's involvement, that was the thinking at that time. And if I understand David correctly, what the committee has done is highlighted the additional areas that you wanted to refer to the Health Department.
Not sure which section.
You're looking on page 2, about halfway down the big paragraph that starts the page, I believe. And now I've lost it, but.
Label must be.
Okay.
Oh, there it is.
Name of recommending
Name of
physician.
recommending physician. Okay, if I may, Mr. Chairman, let me ask you a question. So, as Seth has said, we have a document in front of us with highlighted things that we want to add to what we suggest to the Department of Health, but that doesn't mean necessarily that we've blessed all the other language as of yet, correct?
Absolutely, Senator. As a matter of fact, when we're done with this panel, the plan is to have a conversation regarding this labeling document.
I apologize
No.
for jumping the gun.
No, that's okay. No. Any further questions of the panel? Seeing no questions for the committee, I want to say thank you very much for coming. I very much appreciate it, and I appreciate your expertise. And thank you, Mr. Rood, for your offer to give us some information, if you'll come do that. At this time, committee, what I would like to do, because we've been at this for an hour, and I want to give us a little bit of time before we have questions, collect your thoughts. We are about to go into a discussion on the labeling section that you have, the labeling document you have. I would like to take a 10-minute break and have us return at 10:05. All right, members, we will come to order. We gave a little bit longer break than intended. Well, the co-chair and I were going over some of this language. What we're going to do at this point is have an open discussion regarding the package and labeling and testing language that you have received. Again, the goal is to be able to have a vote on that being a recommendation from this committee next week, if that can be done. Members, to be clear again, what we are talking about doing is making a recommendation to the Department of Health. The Department of Health continues to have the authority to pass any rule it so desires until it is challenged by a court. But this would be a recommendation that if we could make in a bipartisan, bicameral way, I think would be very helpful to the Department of Health. So I have some language in this bill I would like to discuss with the committee, but I'm going to hold off if there are some other members. And I would love to even start with, if the senator is so inclined, the issue that Senator Daniels brought up, because that was one of the issues I wanted to discuss. So Senator Daniels, if you feel comfortable, I'd love to recognize you to bring up the issue you were talking about earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if I'm for or against. I was just curious about including the name of the recommending physician, since we're not talking about a prescription. And that seems to me where this is headed, and I don't know to what extent the recommending physician should, by being on the label, in some way being held accountable for this transaction and the product that they consume? So that's my question.
And Senator Daniels, to that point, I would also maybe suggest at the same time we talk about another provision that is right by there. It says name of patient and directions for use. One of the things that gives me some pause too, Senator, is that inside 788, directions for use were not required. So we would have a dispensary. I don't know where they would even get that information, the directions of use, unless they're just making it up and telling the patient. And I think that may add a chilling effect on dispensaries and may even give patients the idea that that's what their doctor told them. But what are your thoughts on that, Senator?
Well, I agree, Mr. Chairman, and also there may be some physicians who are so knowledgeable that perhaps they have a patient coming to them specifically because they would like to use medical marijuana, so they're well versed in the topic and talk about, well, you could use it in this form or that form, but if you do this form, you need, and they could even talk about dosages. But I think by and large now the state of the medical profession is that knowledge is not there with physicians. So I don't even know that there would be that many physicians who'd be able to recommend a dosage or even a particular product. So maybe that comes later as we become more sophisticated and as this program matures over time.
To that extent, for whatever it's worth, I agree with you, Senator, and I would even go so far as to suggest that we not require or that we not recommend, and in all of these topics we're talking about recommendations we're going to make to the Department of Health, that we not recommend the Department of Health require the name of the physician or directions for use on the label at this time. That would be one of mine. Senator, you're recognized.
Thank you, Representative Nichols. Let me come back then and ask, though, does the dispensary have any obligation to put directions of use? If this is a transaction, seller and buyer, you come in, you don't know what you want to buy necessarily, so you're getting recommendations from people in the dispensary who have some knowledge. So are they under any obligation then to put on this label how they recommended you use it? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
I don't know. I mean, that's I know when I have seen most CBD products, they're currently for sale in Oklahoma, they have some type of recommended usage for the most part put on those products. My fear at that point, even if the way we put it now, is it would look like that's a recommendation that came from their doctor. I mean, it would look like that's because what we're used to is a pharmacy bottle that says take amoxicillin 3 times a day at morning, noon, and dinner. And requiring that to be put on, I think would maybe look to the consumer like it's something different than it is. And the other thing is too, I think it also would make it look like we've had lots of talks about strains. I mean, the way 788 was drafted is a physician makes a recommendation for medical marijuana. They don't make a recommendation for whatever strain, whatever strength, whatever. That's the way it was drafted. So it would, under the guise of consumer safety and letting consumers know what they're getting, I almost think it goes the other way, because it makes consumers think that as opposed to, them being knowledgeable and knowing they have some flexibility, that we've had some talk, I think, from Lawrence Pasternak about consumers trying and figure out what works for them, that I don't want them to go home if they're not very knowledgeable and think, well, this is what my doctor recommended and this is what he said, when at the end of the day what he recommended is there are lots of options. That would be my thought, but your point is well taken about liability. I don't know.
I agree with everything you've said, and I believe we should not recommend that particular language.
Representative Roberts, you are recognized.
To stay on that same topic there, but just kind of some lawsuit protections in there for some of these businesses, maybe kind of some language not to exceed so much per day or something of that nature. I see where we're going, but I still believe if I walk in, I'll buy, and then something happens to me, I can turn around and say, well, it wasn't on the label. Happens every day.
Co-Chair, you're recognized.
And yeah, I think, to me, directions for use make sense, especially I mean, it's very vague here of what directions for use means, but I try to put myself into the thought process here that if my doctor gave me a recommendation, said, hey, you should probably go do this, I mean, I have no concept of what I'm doing here, so I would hope that when I show up to a dispensary and get someone would tell me what to do. As far as I know, the only place you have this is a Van Halen concert. So outside of that, I don't know what to do here. So I think directions for use makes a lot of sense, but I absolutely agree having the name of the physician and a recommendation for how to use it together on a label makes it appear that your doctor told you to do this. And I'm going to guess that a lot of doctors would be squeamish about that, and I think it's an overstatement of what's really happening with the system we have. So my recommendation would be that we strike name of recommending physician but leave directions for use.
Senator Daniels, you're recognized.
So the label would need to make clear that those directions for use are coming from the dispensary. Otherwise, a reasonable man or woman reading any sort of label are going to assume the directions of use came from the physician. Am I in the weeds now? Literally.
We've been in the weeds for months here.
Sorry, it's an expression. It's just an expression. So you're going to require the dispensaries to label each product they sell with directions for use? I do not know if that's a common practice in other medical marijuana states, so.
I'll defer to the co-chair on that question.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Again, the language we're discussing now is the language that the health department passed once already. So they believed through their study on this that directions of use made sense. So I'm going to defer to them. Again, I think some of this is a safety issue that if you don't tell me how much a normal serving is, I mean, it goes back to we hear about chocolate bars where, you're supposed to eat one of those little squares on the chocolate bar. Well, a guy my size and shape doesn't eat one square off of a chocolate bar. So someone needs to tell me to only eat one square.
For a follow-up?
One more follow-up. You need to eat as much chocolate as is available. So looking at it from the cost-benefit analysis to the dispensary and the consumer and the cost of the product, is this an unreasonable requirement of each dispensary to label something with directions for use? I'm still trying to find that happy balance between what is punitive and what is helpful. So I could go either way on that, Mr. Chairman.
At this time, because we're not taking a vote today, I would suggest we continue to do a little research, and members, I think they've heard the arguments on both sides, and then I think that's an issue we'll probably end up having to vote on to figure out where we stand tomorrow or on Wednesday. Any further questions from the committee? Senator Yek, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just so I'm clear, the recommendations that we're going to make there for labeling, that's just the minimum that, I guess it's to Representative Roberts' point, we're just suggesting minimum labeling requirements. So if someone feels they need to, for their own lawsuit protection, add something to that language, there's nothing to prohibit them from doing that in these recommendations. Right?
Correct.
I mean, I don't know that we need to require those disclaimers are on there, but I don't know that we want to restrict them or limit them from adding that for their own protection if they feel the need to do that.
My analysis would be the same as yours, Senator.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. Further. So there's some other language I want us to make sure the committee as a whole talks about on that same page under prohibited products. There's some language in these rules, and these again from the Department of Health, that says no commercial establishment shall sell seedlings or mature plants. I would suggest that we strike that language. I would suggest that for purposes of home grow, the safest and best place for people that choose to home grow is to purchase from a dispensary, and prohibiting commercial establishments from selling seedlings or mature plants, I think would be a problem, but I'll yield for questions. Mr. Co-Chair, you're recognized.
I concur. I absolutely, I mean, if someone's going to start a home grow, their options are going to be to go buy it from a dispensary or go find it somewhere. If Oklahoma is going to be a legal market for medical marijuana, which is what the people of Oklahoma asked us to do through 788, then I think home grow, people who want to home grow need to have access to seedlings at least.
Senator Yak, did you have a question? Okay. Is there any disagreement on striking that language?
I have a question.
Mr. Co-Chair, you're recognized.
I'm not sure why anyone needs mature plants, and that's just a lack of knowledge on the industry maybe. But I mean, if I'm wanting to start my own home grow, I don't need to buy a mature plant. I need to buy a seedling, and I can start growing from that. The people are shaking their head yes, so I think I must be right. So maybe we need to strike, let me read the language. No commercial establishment shall sell mature plants, but leave the ability to sell seedlings. To me, that makes the most sense.
I understand where you're, I guess, Mr. Co-Chairman, I guess I understand where you're coming from for purposes of a home grow if somebody was going to use it. And I guess this may be something I'd like to hold off on, and we talk about, again, a little more next week. I mean, my gut would be you can't get product from a seedling. So if somebody was going to start a home grow, and part of the purposes of 788 was to get rid of the black market, and it's their intention to use the product right away, their options are go purchase a mature plant or go purchase something from the black market. A seedling's not going to help them for a while. So I would say there would be a need for purchase of a mature plant in a home grow situation, but I'm happy to gather some more information on that. Representative Roberts, you're recognized.
Is there an amount of mature plants that the dispensary could have on hand, supplies? I mean, two mature plants that they could sell, and then once they sell one, they can buy another. I mean, kind of getting in the weeds there with that, but kind of the details on that. So that way they don't have 50 plants sitting there, plus the disposal of those plants once, I guess, they go bad or whatever.
So I would argue, and I understand what you're saying, I would tend not to want to put that limit on it because I would think supply and demand would determine how many mature plants they want to have. If there is enough people that choose to purchase mature plants, and remember, there's already a limit under 788 as to how many plants a home grow can have. So there is that baseline, but if a home grow patient wanted those all to be mature plants, I think that a dispensary is only going to stock what they're capable of selling. I mean, again, I've said this before, though. I'm one step shy of a laissez-faire capitalist. I think the market will handle a lot of these problems. So I see where you're going about having a large plant stock, but I would actually argue if there's a large plant stock, that's because there's a large market for a large plant stock. And if they don't have that large plant stock, the market is still there. So they will go get those through black market means as opposed to above board and as was voted on by 788. You bring a good point. I guess that'd be my thought.
No, I agree 100% supply and demand on that. But, and this is where I've become completely dumb. I know my wife and I, we garden. Man, we just cut a rose bush down, throw it out on a street corner, or I throw it out in the grass and mow it, whatever. So say I have a dispensary. This is, like I said, this is where I become a complete idiot on the knowledge of this. But I have a dispensary, and I have 50 plants, those plants rot or whatever, do I just take them, throw them out in the dumpster out there? This, like I said, this is where I become a complete idiot. People walk out, I mean, is it still a live plant? What's the disposal of that? Or does it even matter at that point, kind of like a rose bush? It's a dead plant. You can't do anything with it.
There have been standards on disposals that have been suggested in the past, and I've even been contacted by some companies that do disposals. I've been contacted by companies that do disposals in other states. We haven't dealt with disposals in these rules, but I do think that's a secondary issue we need to deal with. But I know other states have handled that through a mechanism. I just don't know what that is off the top of my head for a disposal mechanism. Senator Daniels.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question connected to that issue. So there's a certain number of plants a person is allowed to possess, and we had talked at some point that there might be a registry when you go into a dispensary and purchase a product. There's going to be a record of that somewhere that other people could look at. So if you buy plants in one dispensary and you go and buy some more plants in another, they're not in this draft that we're in, but somebody's going to have to be and look to see whether or not you're purchasing more than your requisite number?
So maybe, I mean, that's another step down the road on that. I would tend to be a little worried about that, only because just because you purchase more than your requisite number doesn't mean you still possess more than your requisite number. So that would give me a little bit of pause. If you took a plant to maturity, took it down, bought a new one, so you're not going to have the same plant forever. But I think it's a little outside this, but we have had some other talks, Senator, about whether or not we're going to list this in the database we do with opioids. All that stuff, I think, is still to be decided. Further questions? I had one other issue I wanted to make sure we dealt with. The language inside, I don't know that I necessarily have a change that I want to this language, but I want to make sure that we all read this language the same way. The language inside prohibitive products talks about not manufacturing edibles that are attractive to children, things like gummy bears, animal shapes, fake cigarettes, human animal fruit, things like that, cartoon caricatures. But my reading of that language does not stop the manufacturing of edibles, just not edibles that are for the goal is to attract them to children. If anyone has a different reading of that, let me know, but I wanted to talk about it in the committee before that gets talked about somewhere else. Senator Daniels, you're recognized.
So what you're questioning is that the actual product that looks like a gummy bear, but is actually something probably not pronounceable. You're worried that that language is actually prohibiting them from manufacturing the actual product that you would chew on and it would taste like a gummy bear, doesn't look like a gummy bear?
Yeah, I'm actually not worried about that. This is an issue that I want us to talk about openly before somebody else gets that and I think misinterprets it. Because when I first read this, I thought it outlawed edibles. And when I read it again, it appears to me that it does not in any way outlaw edibles. It just outlaws specific edibles that are marketed to children. That's my reading of this. If there is another reading of that anyone has, I want them to let me know. But if not, I think, because I actually probably am okay with this language, so long as everyone agrees that was the intent.
I agree with your reading. I just wanted to jump in per your request at the start of the meeting. For those who are listening at home, the language that we're actually going over right now, if you go to the Senate website, click on the meeting notice for today, the language is linked at the bottom. There's a hyperlink, so if you're wanting to read what we're reading, that is available on the website right now.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Senator Yek, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this question's for you. So we're identifying in that language what type of edibles would not be allowed. We're including those lists. So what type of edibles would be allowed, and what forms are those?
Yeah, my reading of this, and this is why I just wanted to discuss it as a committee to make sure everybody's on the same page. Geometric shapes would be fine as an edible. Anything in any other geometric shapes is what I think would probably be most likely to be produced. Circles, squares, rectangles, triangles, whatever you want to do. And then anything else that is not geared towards children. So it doesn't bear resemblance to human, animal, fruit, things like that, would be my reading of that. Yes, for follow-up.
Thank you. So the geometric shapes would be the same product as might also be formed in a gummy barrel, just so it would be colorful and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I think it could still be, I mean, under this language, I think it could still be colorful. I think this is similar to, and I hate comparing this to cigarettes, but frankly, it's similar to other cigarette type language that we have. Why on your manufacturing of cigarette packets, you can't put Captain America, and you can't put, you know, some other, you can't put Spider-Man, you can't put something else where you're not packaging that in a manner that is geared towards children. And even in this, it's trying to get rid of fake cigarettes. I think the goal of this is to make it more medical as opposed to quote unquote cool. I mean, something that somebody's going to want to have, somebody's going to want to, I think the goal is to continue the use of the product, but not have a marketing that is more geared towards children. It's for a follow-up, Senator.
Thank you. So something that looks like a Hershey bar, or something that looks like a cookie, something that looks like a brownie?
I think that, I mean.
Where would that fall?
My reading of this, and I'm glad you asked that, that's why I want to have this discussion. My reading of this is all of that would be fine. I mean, something that looks like a Hershey bar, something that looks like a brownie, something that looks like a cookie, something that looks like a food product other than, you know, fruit, than fruit. And anyone that has had young children knows when you have young children, I swear, I think we had a nuclear bomb supply of fruit snacks when we had 3 kids under the age of 5 at our home. But I think brownies, I'm glad you brought that up, brownies, Hershey bars, cookies, I think those would all fall under this language and be fine. Unless there's another reading of it. That's why I wanted to talk about it. I wanted, if we did this, for every member of this committee to have an understanding of what it is they are voting for and whether or not they feel comfortable with that. That's why I thought it was a conversation worth having. For follow-up?
And I appreciate the discussion, I really do. So I just don't know how this is pretty subjective language, so I don't know how we really get into a clear definition of what's allowed and what isn't allowed. I don't think that's possible, really, because kids are attracted to cookies. And under this language, cookies are just fine. So I don't know how we tighten that up or if there's any need to tighten that up.
Senator Daniels?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But I think somewhere, maybe not in this document, when we talked about food products, I thought they had to be individually wrapped. And you have labeling that says keep out of the reach of children. So for those other food products, that would be the precautionary measure that would be taken. Am I remembering that correctly?
Under the food product safety standards, yes. They did have to be individually labeled. Yeah. And Senator Yak, I wasn't sure if you were suggesting, because that's a conversation worth having, whether or not we should strike all of this language, because it's, but I didn't necessarily have an issue with it, but it is a conversation whether or not we don't want to do that or come up with new language. That's a good conversation.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. No, not at all. I'm
follow-up.
comfortable with this language. There needs to be some language in there as far as products that might be attractive to kids. And if this is as strong as it needs to be, then I'm okay with that, but I have some concerns, and if those, Senator Daniels maybe address that. If those other items that we talked about, brownies, cookies, if those are individually labeled, candy bars, then maybe that covers my concern.
But we'll look at those food safety standards, because I think that's an excellent point when you're talking about these. Any further discussion on that? Well, I had one other issue I wanted to bring up then. I know that's shocking. Under the general provisions, laboratory accreditation, what we've done, and I guess I'm going to bring up two issues at once because we need to go ahead and talk about them because Senator Paxton brought up this issue earlier, so it's a good time to discuss it. What we have done for most of these standards is made them, in this draft, applicable beginning May 15th, 2019. That's one issue I think that is, I think needs to be open to discussion as was brought up. The other issue inside that, under general provisions, there's language which is right underneath prohibited products. There's language that says laboratory accreditation beginning May 15th, 2019, labs must be, it's musts, but that's a typo. It should say labs must, not labs musts. But I think musts would be like a smell. Beginning May 15th, 2019, labs must be in accreditation by NELAC Institute, TNI. My suggestion, if you go on the ANSI site, it says the average is a year, and that's just on their homepage. So it's real easy to find. My suggestion is for that particular May 15th, 2019, we need to make that May 15th, 2020. Because of the time it would take for labs to get ANSI certified. We do, in the meantime, have this provisional testing laboratory approval on page 2 that allows, if you are in compliance with ANSI protocols, you can have a provisional license, but by May 15th, 2020, there's a hard date. You need to be ANSI certified for that time. You've now had enough time to get your certification. We've added another several months in addition to the 1 year that ANSI says it takes. So I'll open both those issues up for discussion. Senator Daniels, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let me see if I understand this correctly. I may just need you to explain it again. So you put in, it says 2019 right now, but you have the section on the provisional licensing because you agree to go and seek all the proper accreditations.
Yes, ma'am, Senator. My interpretation of the language, and there may be other interpretations of this, but my interpretation of the language as it stands now is beginning May 15th, 2019, labs must be accredited by TNI or ANSI, and that's on the bottom of page 2. So as of now, May 15th, 2019 is the drop dead date. You've got to receive your ANSI certification or your TNI certification by that date. In the meantime, you could get a provisional certification. What I would suggest is that we move that to 2020 because that gives the full year that ANSI says, and again, it's all on the ANSI website, that ANSI says it takes to become certified. But I do think there needs to be a drop dead date at which all labs that do this need to be certified by TNI or ANSI. We're just giving the market time to get caught up.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am, for follow-up.
Would it help at all to take that laboratory accreditation section with the provisional testing section, put them together? You shall be certified by this date, except, well, you're saying even with a provisional license, they still should have everything completed by 2020.
Yeah, by May 15th, 2020, that gives that gives a year and, I mean, September 5, 6, about a year and 8 months. So it gives quite a bit of runway in order to that additional time. And we've heard testimony that there's ANSI certified labs. Let's assume that's true, but whether it's true or not, the goal is to give enough runway, but there does come a point at which I think, you know, both in the Department of Health and in the Unity Bill, there was a time at which you needed to be ANSI certified. I mean, eventually we want this to be run by certified labs. So I just want to give enough runway so we don't end up May 15th, 2019. Well, let's be real specific. May 15th, 2019, we got 2 weeks left in session, and all of a sudden we don't have enough ANSI certified labs, and they get to come say, you knew this process took a year, you gave us less than a year, why did you do that? I mean, I'm just trying to anticipate a problem.
Mr. Chairman, one other question then on that, please. So is there even a need for this provisional testing approval? If you're going to give everybody until May of 2020, why is it necessary for them to get any provisional approval if they're working towards their final accreditation?
That's a great thought. So the theory behind that one, we had that talk, and I can't remember, I think it was a compromise we talked about with somebody, but the theory behind it is we did want them working under those same standards. So if you don't have provisional approval, what could happen is somebody come in and not be following the standards and just say, I'm gonna make as much money as I can from now until the time, till 2020. So the theory behind it being in order to get a provisional testing, and I think the co-chair actually had a really good analogy of the hospice industry, because they use a very, very similar, the home health industry, which I'm in, uses a very, very similar analysis where while you're getting, before you get your Medicaid number or even your license, you have to be following those protocols. Then they come in and check you out and say, are you following the protocols? And if you are, then eventually someday you get licensed. But it sounds actually very like a similar situation, even in the healthcare committee under like a JCAHO accreditation. So you're following JCAHO standards, and then JCAHO comes and says, hey, are you doing what you need to be doing?
So one final question on that then.
Yes, ma'am, Senator.
Then under that first sentence in provisional testing laboratory approval, why does it say may? Why does it not say must?
Lab may request provisional.
Lab may request provisional license approval.
I don't know.
If you don't want a rogue lab being set up, not following anything and knowing that they have until 2020, just curious, should may be must?
I actually agree with you. I mean, if you were to change, if we were to change that to 2020, I think everyone's intent on the industry side and on the legislature side is that it be done in compliance. So I agree with that you must request a provisional license if you're going to move forward in the process. Mr. Co-Chair, you're recognized. Sorry.
You're fine. Would it make more sense, going back to general provisions and your date, which I'm not sure that I agree with your reading, but I do see what you're saying. If you put beginning May 15th, 2019, labs must be accredited or have achieved, I don't know, I'm not the wordsmith here, have achieved provisional testing approval. That way they're in the either you've got to be accredited or you've got to be in the program by this date. I mean, is that maybe a cleaner way to accomplish your goals?
I'd be okay with that. Yeah, I think if you were to add that provisional language in there, that wouldn't bother me. And I think if we did that, we probably wouldn't want to change the may to must under the provisional laboratory testing requirement, because they could get there either way. I like that change. Senator Daniels, you're recognized.
I have a question back on labeling, but I'll go there later if you want me to.
No. Whatever.
And so in that medical marijuana labeling requirements up there, it says on about line 4, for use by qualified patients only. Then you jump down to cannabinoid concentrates, can't pronounce it this morning, and down, about line 10, it says for use by Oklahoma medical marijuana patients only. Could somebody tell me what the distinction is and why one says Oklahoma and one doesn't?
Where's the Oklahoma section, Senator?
Under help me over here, cannabinoid concentrates on line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8 or 9, it says for use by Oklahoma medical marijuana patients only. But in the previous section, it didn't specify Oklahoma. And I just didn't know if somebody left out Oklahoma or somebody added it in for emphasis, didn't know why they were different.
That's a good question. I don't.
Big question for the health department who wrote these.
Yeah, I think we ought to ask the health department why they drafted it that way. But I do agree, Senator, that's confusing. And what the last thing we want to do is ask something that's confusing as to what the label should be. And I think one of the testimonies we heard on testing is that to the extent we can marry edible testing to non-edible testing is a good thing. I would think to the extent we can marry edible labeling to non-edible labeling would be, I mean, if the goals of regulations are compliance, we should keep them as simple as possible. So that's a great catch. Any further questions or thoughts?
I have another subject if we're done.
Yep. Mr. Co-Chair for a question.
Changing the subject, one of the things that we asked David to do this week is to write up a warning label if we are going to have this 6-month lag where a product that's not tested is out there. The wording that we're looking at today is that it would need to say on the label, this product has not been tested for contaminants. I personally don't feel that that's anywhere near strong enough. I'm much more in line with, something like, we don't know what's in here and it may kill you. That may not be quite where we want to go, but in my mind, this product has not been tested for contaminants is not strong enough language if we're going to sell completely untested marijuana. I would like something a little stronger, so I wanted to throw that out there.
Senator Daniels, you're recognized.
Well, from the school of less is more, if you capitalize it and put it in bold, this item has not been tested, then you don't have to have this long list of things that you might have hoped it was tested for. Would that declaratory statement be enough and be simple and concise enough that people would go, whoa, I am buying something at my own risk that has not been tested? That's the way I would go, but you might want to go really, really, really comprehensive.
I'm not sure that I know what answer I want here. I just, when I read that, I don't know, it just didn't seem, yes, I think yours is a better answer than what we have before us. Just because it's not just contaminants. I mean, there are a whole lot of things that we're testing for. I mean, we have no idea the THC levels of the products that these people are buying. We know nothing at all about what's inside that package. So maybe your answer is better, yes.
Senator Paxton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of going back to what I said earlier, if there are actually labs that are available to do this on this provisional approval, I don't think we need to have the label. I think we need to have the testing if it's possible. I just don't think the public will read those labels as close as they should. And I'll read the warning on there, but I'm just thinking every time I've ever taken a medication, I always read what's printed on there. And if I was going to be using medical marijuana, I would want to know what the THC level is. I'd want to know that it has been tested and that it's safe. And then it goes back to what the chairman said was, we do not want to do anything to delay implementation. And I think we've all agreed we're not going to do that. But if these labs are available and they can get this provisional approval through the health department, I don't see any reason to have a label that says this hasn't been tested, because it will all be tested if you're buying it from the store.
And Senator, I think because the 6-month request was mostly mine, I frankly, assuming everything we've been told is true, so that you don't know that, but let's assume that for a second. So everything I say is assuming that. I probably would be willing to fall off on the 6-month requirement. What I would want is, in order to do that, and I think the whole committee would want this. Number one, to know that that's true, and that there is a proper, not only is it true that there's 1 or 2, but we have the capacity to handle one or two, and what capacity is that? Are we creating a situation where if you're a big city dispensary, and this is coming from an Oklahoma City guy, but are we creating a situation where if you're a big city dispensary that tests a whole bunch of products, you're going to get theirs, and we'll get to the other ones when we get to it? Or my other concern would be that I would want to hear from the Department of Health how quickly they are capable of getting the licenses issued. Because we actually have some requirements in here that I'm okay with, because it was based upon the delay that they can't do anything until they have these licenses, until the licenses are issued. So I would want to hear from the Department of Health, how quickly do they think they could issue the license? I haven't even touched the issue of whether or not there's going to be a 2-month delay, and I'm just making this up because I don't know whether or not there's going to be a delay to get them the license because we had this, and I figured there's no way there'd be a 6 months. But I definitely would be open to that if those 3 questions were answered. Senator Paxton, you're recognized.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would totally agree with that. And like I said last week, I'm not objecting to the 6-month delay. But if there is the capacity of the existing laboratory market to handle this without the delay, I think that would be better. But if there is not an option, I think that goes back to we just need to wait and see. Kind of, Mr. Rood was going to come, I think, was going to report back to us as to what the capacity was. And so I would agree, if there's only 3 labs that can do this, they can't get the capacity out there that they need to, so we would need the delay. So I think we'll just kind of on that and wait and see as far as my opinion. But going back to, I do agree with what you said last week, if we need to push this back in order to keep this thing moving, we can do it with the labels. So
I think, Senator Paxton, I think you make an excellent point. So I'm keeping a list of things that we still need to know we're going to talk about at the end. So that got on the list. Any other issues for discussion? So I'm gonna recap what I have as the 3 issues that we were going to make sure we discuss next week. Give members some time to think about them. Number 1 is we had some good discussion and we had some good ideas on both sides as to whether or not we're going to do directions, whether or not we're going to include directions for use in our recommendations to the health department. Number 2, we had some discussion and we're going to need to look into whether or not we are going to allow the selling of mature plants in our recommendations to the health department. Number 3, the issue we just talked about, the capacity of existing labs, and I'll take it upon myself to call the health department and get a feel for how long it would take them to issue those licenses for laboratory testing. Is there any other issue the committee thinks I've left out that we need to make sure we address for next week? Next week, we will, any further questions or issues anyone would like to bring before the committee? So, Senator Yak, you are recognized.
I don't know what you were about to say. You maybe were going to answer the question before I ask it. So remind me what we're going to do next week. I think you said earlier there's going to be a document and we could take a vote next week.
The goal thank you, Senator. Yeah, that's where I was going. The goal next week is 2 things. We're going to bring some people in to talk about banking. We do not anticipate that being very long. And then the goal would be to have more of a, and Mr. Co-Chair, this will be your meeting, so make sure I'm not overstepping. But what I'm thinking it would be to have more of a committee structure where if we can reach a consensus, we could take a vote on sending a recommendation to the Department of Health. That's an aggressive goal because there may be more questions that come up. So we're not, but that would be the goal. You recognize, Senator?
Thank you. So at whatever point that is, when we're presented with this document, that will be a 1 vote on the document in its entirety. It won't be section by section. How would you anticipate that coming about?
I don't know that I have that authority at the moment because I think that would be, at that time, my co-chair will be chairing the committee, and we're kind of in uncharted territory, so we're leaving ourselves maximum flexibility. Mr. Co-chair, I'll yield that to you.
I would anticipate that the way that I will want to proceed next week is we'll have an updated document with some of the changes that we've made today. We're going to have some discussion in that where we're going to want to amend that document. As we go through amendments, I hope, I mean, what we did last week was basically have a conversation, and then everyone assented to, yes, this is the direction we want to go. So that would be my hope, that it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal vote, but it is possible that we'll get to a place where we'll need to vote on amendments to the bill. Somewhat like a normal committee process, that you can come in, we have a bill draft in front of us, you can submit amendments in that committee meeting. Those amendments can be voted up or down. Now, my hope is not to have to go into that formal of a process, that this can be much more of a, so far we haven't run into anything that we were not unanimous on. My wish would be that we can continue in that direction. Whether or not we can accomplish that goal, I don't know. And if we can't, how I handle it, I guess we'll find out when we get there. There are no rules for the game we're playing right now.
Any further business, committee members? If not at this time, any further announcements, Mr. Co-Chair? Not this time. We will stand adjourned till next Wednesday at 9 a.m.